are live. I'll just give it a couple of seconds to let it kick in. Okay, we're live on my channel. Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. I haven't posted anything for a while because I got banned by YouTube for the video I did about, well, I can't remember now, so it doesn't matter. Everything I seem to do on YouTube is wrong. But anyway, one thing that I have done right today is get hold of Nick Griffin. You can see him to the right of me on the screen. I've had some contact with him over the past few months, and thankfully he has agreed to appear on this channel and talk to us about all sorts of things. So without further ado, Nick Griffin, hello, welcome to my channel. I just want to say how honored I am that you would give me some of your time and my subscribers some of your time. Yeah, welcome.
Well, thank you, Dion. I've watched your progress or trajectory through the counter-jihad movement, or whatever you want to call it, with growing interest for some time. So it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Brilliant. Nick, when I made a trailer for this interview, which I posted on Twitter and BitChute, I've had such a positive response because people have been wondering where you went, what happened to you. I also have people who are a lot younger than me who have heard about you because you do have a reputation and want to know more about you. You are a hero in some people's eyes and a villain in other people's eyes. So can you
a monster.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, a monster in some people's eyes. Now my dog's going mad. Anyway.
There you go. There is.
Nick, will you just take us back a few years to when you were the leader of the British National Party, the BNP?
Yes, I was. I joined the British National Party. Well, I first got involved in the British National Party in about 1993. I joined it in 1996, and I was elected as its leader in 1999. When I joined it, frankly, it was a very hardcore neo-fascist joke organisation. In some ways, its founder John Tyndall was actually a very decent, kind and honest man, but his only concession to sense in his early days was when his crazed Nazi comrades said, let's use the swastika. He said, well, let's have a red, white and blue swastika. Crackpot, basically. But nevertheless, a man who saw what was happening with Britain very early on, was very worried about it and had the courage to stand up. And although some things he got wrong, he had the courage to stand up and do something about it.
And from your years in the BNP, what I know through the journey that I'm on, you and the BNP and other members of the BNP were actually the very first people to shine a spotlight on the Muslim grooming gangs in the UK. What happened to you there?
Well, just a little bit more about how the BNP moved from its Tyndall neo-Nazi stage into the position that I put it, and then I'll come on to that directly. So first of all, I said to the members of the BNP, look, you've been going around in circles for decades. For demographic reasons, Britain has at most 20 years before the mess that terrifies you and me can no longer be resolved. So we have to get our act together. I wrote an article, I think in 1997, called No Time for Peter Pan, which said there's certain things this party is going to make itself electable, has to do, it has to change genuinely. It has to drop this Nazi rubbish. That's something from the past. It's a foreign country. It's not part of our tradition, and it's thoroughly indecent in many ways. It has to stop pretending that it's 1963 or something, and there's only a handful of immigrants, non-white immigrants here, There's huge numbers of them here, many of them very integrated in our society. Anyone who says they've all got to go, they're all going to be kicked out, is one, thoroughly immoral, and two, going to get nowhere. So I persuaded the party to change from a position of stopping immigration and compulsory forced repatriation to stopping immigration and voluntarily financially assisted emigration or re-emigration for those who wanted to go, and making, frankly, the best of a bad job with the society we've now got. And I also said that I, as a father, a family man, and so on, I find the promotion of homosexuality abhorrent, but the party's whole position of recriminalising homosexuality, again, was wrong, unfair, unkind, and politically impossible. So I got the party to change its position from being recriminalise homosexuals to a position of don't ask, don't tell, which I continue to believe is a far better position than either having people criminalised for their sexuality or for the position we've got now, when parents, Christian parents especially, are being criminalised for saying they don't want their young children taught that LGBTQ plus is something wonderfully moral and something they should get involved in. So that's where I started with the BNP and where I took it, which in due course got me elected as an MEP. That perhaps we'll discuss a bit later on. But you asked about the Muslim grooming gangs thing. So when I was first involved with politics, I was involved in politics from a very early age, way beyond the BNP. When I was first involved in the National Front and in then the British National Party, we looked at the mass immigration that was starting in Britain, and we said, this is going to go horribly wrong one day, crowding all these different people into a small country. And we regarded it as, frankly, a matter of race and colour, which to some extent it is. If you have people of the same colour, race, and hue, and so on, they're more assimilable in many ways. But that's rather by the by, as I'm just putting it historically. As I say, we viewed it as a question of race and continued to do so until 2001. I was campaigning in Oldham in the 2001 election. And I met a group of very young lads, probably only 13 or 14. We were handing out leaflets, and these young local lads said, well, what are you doing? So we said, and so they said, well, so what do you think of that? They used the P word, which of course we mustn't use for the Asian immigrants living in their area. So I said, well, we don't think they should come, and so on, and no more should come. And they said, and then they said something to me. They said, well, we always have trouble with them at school. And they're always telling us that in their book, this is their promised land, and they're going to take it off us. So I'm like, well, really? So out of the mouths of babes and sucklings. So I went and got a copy of the Quran. And what I read, I found totally horrifying. If you read it literally, where, as I'm sure many of your viewers will know, verse after verse after verse is blood-curdling hatred of the Kappas, the infidels, the Christians, the Jews, and so on, and exhortations to fight them brutally, beat them on the head with iron bars, etc., etc., and constantly that the women who your right arm own, i.e. those who can be taken with the sword arm, with the fighting arm, they're yours as sex slaves. So I read this thing and I looked at and spoke to various liberals and so on, and all of them said, no, it's not there. None of it's like that. It's a book of peace and love. So I said, well, it's not a book of peace and love. Just read the thing. This is horrific. And I saw these, I found the piece that these young lads were referring to about lands that they didn't know would be theirs, given to them, and so on. Now, years later, I've discovered, of course, that the literal reading of the Quran, which is what the Wahhabi Salafists do, is not what all Muslims do. Now, if someone had explained much earlier on that there's many members of the Muslim community, until recently, the large majority, who were indeed allowed by their version of the faith to interpret the Quran. And the interpretation, for instance, says, well, Muhammad wrote these things at a time of war, so it was valid. We're not now in a time of war, so those things are put on the shelf and so on. So had I been told the truth about the Quran, which is that there are different ways of looking at it, and that different Muslims look at it in different ways, and it wouldn't actually have gone down the road of blanket, this book is evil, ergo all who follow it are evil and a threat, which simply isn't the case. The problem, of course, is that whereas the Muslims who came here to work the cotton mills in Oldham and so on in the 1950s and early 60s, many of them came from a tradition which had reinterpreted the Quran and made it peaceful and something as a relatively good neighbor. The Western political elite, because they're so greedy for Saudi oil and especially Saudi gold, have allowed the Saudi Arabians to spend billions of dollars every single year promoting their form of Islam in Western societies, including in Muslim societies in Britain. And their form of Islam is the original thing read in tooth and claw, which says that any interpretation of the Quran is illegal, is in fact more than that, is a heresy worthy of death for any Muslim who does it. And therefore, everything in the Quran is, that's what you've got to do. Fight the infidels, beat the kafirs, take their women, etc., etc. So that's a little bit of an aside. Coming back to where I was in 2001 and so on, I also found family after family saying to me that these bastards are molesting our girls. They get them when they're 11 or 12 with cigarettes and then miniature bottles of vodka and then cannabis and then coke or crack or smack or whatever, and they turn them into their whores. And the police aren't interested. Time and time again, I heard, this is 2001. I was hearing from families sitting with heartbroken families saying that we'd been to the police and the police turned around and said, why don't you want your daughter going out with a Pakistani boy? Are you racists? You are racists. If you carry on with this, we're going to arrest you. This was time and time again. And so we started the campaign on this issue and it took some years for this to build up. I had when in 2001, during the riots, I said on television to Jeremy Paxman, I said, stop talking about Asians. He was talking about Asians and trouble with the Asians. So I said, stop talking about the Asians. This isn't an Asian problem. This is a Muslim problem. At which an elderly Sikh watching it in Northampton told me later he jumped up from his chair and cheered that finally some white politician had told the truth and got in touch. So I became friends with him and a number of other Sikhs, and then learned from them as well that they had the same problem with these people. I had West Indians coming up and saying they had the same problem. So we got more and more involved with this. Of course, the media blanked it until the BBC thought it'd be a very good idea to insert infiltrators, multiple infiltrators, into the BNP and to secretly film me making speeches in Bradford and Keighley in Yorkshire, where this grooming thing was really at its peak. And that's a very important point. There's a little aside there that everyone has Rotherham as the peak, the worst of this, or perhaps Telford. We're going to find out sooner or later that Rotherham, Telford, they were minor points. I was very active in South Yorkshire, Sheffield, Rotherham, and so on, the mining communities there and so on. And there was this problem there, definitely. I was very involved with trying to bring it to people's attention. But the scale of the problem in the West Yorkshire heavy woolen towns, Keighley, Bradford, and so on, is, I believe, far, far worse than the problem that there was and still is in Rotherham and Telford. All that's got to come out, in the end. And one day, I believe it will. But anyway, the BBC filmed me making these speeches. And if they'd come up and said, can we film me making the speech? I'd have said, yeah, come on in. So of course they do it secretly as if it's some kind of, sinister thing. And they showed the very short clips when I was saying what they regarded as the most extreme things about the Muslim grooming problem, about how white lads are hit with baseball bats and white girls are taken with this sword arm by these people, as the Quran tells them. And what was the other thing? I said, yes, I refer to the Quran as this vicious, wicked book. This vicious, wicked faith, referring to Islam. And they showed these, and I, due course, ended up in court in Leeds twice on 8 charges. The first time the jury could agree that 4 of the charges I was not guilty. They couldn't agree on the other 4. And the CPS, Crown Prosecution Service, made the, at the time, unprecedented decision to immediately try me again on it. So I faced a second trial, and the second time, because the mistake was this, the CPS obviously see this sitting in their posh London offices with their upper class liberal university backgrounds, think, oh, this is all terrible and so So they thought, we'll get a conviction. We'd get a conviction amongst us, because I was on trial in Leeds with juries of ordinary working Yorkshire men and women. And in the second trial especially, I knew the moment that I'd won the case, because the barrister, who was posh and from southern England, rather like me, because I'm sort of middle class from London originally, and obviously no accent and all the rest of it. And so he was sort of talking to me more or less one-to-one. He was saying, Mr. Griffin, you must realise that if you said these things in a, say, a debating society in Oxford or Cambridge, because he went to Oxford, I went to Cambridge, then this would be quite acceptable. But to say these things in a rough working class pub with angry people, then you can surely see this may cause trouble and hatred. And I watched the jury's faces as they saw this posh top twat say that they were so stupid that a smooth talking southerner could come up and wind them up to cause trouble and resentment when there was none. And I knew at that point I was going to walk free, and duly the jury found me not guilty, and that was that. But that was 2004 that I made those speeches. And all the BBC and all the police could think to do was to try to get me jailed for them. If instead of that they'd acted on it, then the thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of girls who were groomed and gang raped and drugged and in some cases murdered after 2004 would have been spared that.
Can I ask you, Nick, the stories are coming forward, we're getting to hear about places like Rotherham and Telford and Leicester and Coventry, and all it affects just about every single British town. But I read a report the other day, not the J report on Rotherham, but a report that was made after the J report, looking into Rotherham Council and to see whether Rotherham Council had in any way, shape or form improved its services towards children in care, children who had needs, and that report came back very, very negatively, saying that there were no improvements to be seen. And in that report, the person who authored that report said that nobody, none of the counsellors, none of the social workers, and none of the police could be found guilty of any criminal offence, which means that nobody is going to be prosecuted for ignoring these girls for so many years. And when I read something like that, I think, well, it matters not then that we get to hear what's happening, because nothing will be done about it. What can we do about it, Nick? Now, you are the professional here. You've been the member of parliament in Europe. You've been the leader of a major political party. You know the ins and outs of these things. What can we do to get justice for these girls?
Stop asking for it and step out to get it. Stop expecting the politicians to do anything about it. Stop expecting the media to talk about it and come up with any solutions. They simply will not. They're not interested for a number of reasons. The largest part of it is snobbery. These are, in their eyes, working class white trash. They really don't care. They throw those entire communities on the scrap heap when they shut down the pits and the steel mills and so on globalist ideological dogma. So they've condemned thousands to die of heroin overdoses and so on, because there's no way out of those places. They've ruined those communities. They really don't care. As long as they're getting their money, they'll turn a blind eye. Furthermore, the Muslim community delivers, especially to the Labour Party, a very powerful, huge block vote. The Lib Dems as well in many areas, and the Tories want in on it because they know that demographically they're growing. So either they get their votes or they're going to be knocked out in 15 years' time when all the baby boomers have died. So they're all after that Muslim block vote. And although not all Muslims are groomers, the vast majority of these gang groomers are Muslims, and those communities could and should do more to do something about it, and to make those comments can very easily be presented by especially Labour opponents or the BBC as Islamophobia or whatever. So they're all either greedy for the votes or they're scared of losing the votes. Now, what I just said about their community should do more about it, actually, let me qualify that by saying so should ours. And why should we expect, as a matter of fact, members of the Muslim community to confront thug gang members who live next door to them, who know who they are? Why should we expect them to do anything about it when our own political leaders say nothing about it, our own cretin church leaders say nothing about it, and our own people do nothing about it? I'd say the most shocking thing of all is that with, according to Sarah Campion, the Labour MP for Rotherham, up to a million British girls, some of them Sikhs, some of them Hindu, some of them black, but the vast majority white, the vast majority English, up to a million gang raped by these people over several decades. And there's not one English father in prison for doing something about it himself. That's truly shocking. Now, I'm not saying English fathers should go out and kill groomers themselves. I don't understand why some don't or haven't, but that's their problem, not mine, really. But if people want to sort this out, then the only way to do it is as a community, and to stand up and make it impossible for the groomers to do what they do. So when we were active about this in Keighley especially, we formed a group called MAP, Mothers Against Paedophiles. We put out leaflets urging people to come forward with the registration of car numbers, which through various slightly dodgy means, we could then find out where these people lived, with a view just to sending a group of mothers round to them to say, stop this, or there'll be trouble. This doesn't happen in Northern Ireland. Why? Because both communities there, the Protestants and the Catholics, have, because of their appalling, shocking history between them, and with us as well, interfering in many ways, sometimes making things better, sometimes making things worse. Both communities still have paramilitaries and people of that mindset. And if anyone did that to their daughters, they'd be around and they'd break their legs with pickaxe handles. So it doesn't happen. Now, that shouldn't have to happen in Britain. It will do one day, but the only way to stop it happening is if those communities who don't want this to happen, for instance, if there's groomers outside the schools, then the white community should do what the Muslims very properly do when in their areas there's red light districts and there's prostitutes and scumbag businessmen in flash cars driving past and picking them up. They go out on the street, they go out with video cameras, they take pictures, they get the registration of the cars, and then they say, right, we're going to pass this to the police, but also to your wife, Mr. Posh Businessman, and so on and so forth. And they stop, not with any violence, but just by exposing what's going on. And that is what our community needs to do as well. It needs to be organized so that, not in a violent way, but just any threat to, any attack on one of ours is an attack on all of us. And we all come out and we all stand together and say this must stop. And that really is, I believe, all necessary. But for political solutions, there are none because they don't want to know. And demographically, as you said, I've been involved in a political party. I'm not getting involved in a political party saying that this can all be sorted out. Vote, give us money, vote for us, we'll sort it out. It's too late. The entire West demographics are such that the old West is going down the tubes and there's nothing anyone can do about it. You, I, the majority of our population are of a certain age. In another 20, 30 years, we simply won't be here. We will be replaced by huge numbers of young people from immigrant communities, very nice people, some of them, very bad people, a few of them. Doesn't matter. They're just not people like us. And anyone who says we want the old Britain back, which is what the Brexit vote was all about, I'm afraid you're fooling yourselves. It's not going to happen. You either have to get away from it to somewhere which is different, someone which hasn't gone down this road, such as Hungary or Poland, or you have to set about trying to find a way to make this multicultural thing work. And the only way it can work, the only way it can turn out something a bit like Syria before the war sent it all horribly wrong, for instance, that's a totally different subject, but Syria was a genuine multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-religious state where people lived side by side in peace. They didn't do so by pretending they were all the same, by saying to the the Christians that you've got to shut up, by saying to the indigenous people, you've got to be silent about your past and so on. They did it by every single community having its own identity, being allowed to have its identity, and being proud to have its identity. So is this true for the English? Try holding a St. George's Day parade in almost any country in the town and see what the local council tell you. And you'll find out that the English in particular, the British in particular, the Germans in Germany, the Dutch in Holland and so on, we are all second-class citizens in our own country. And from now on, it's not political, it's got to be a civil rights struggle to establish our right to be identify as an ethnic group, to organise in pursuit of our interests, because politics, as the population becomes more mixed and more we become balkanized, politics will cease to be about class, it will be about identity. And so white heterosexuals have a right to our identity as English, Scottish, Danish, Swedish, or whatever, and as straight, normal people who want to bring up our families with our values. Unless we get it, there will be no peace between these different communities when the existing thing goes horribly wrong, as it's going to.
Well said. If I can just turn it back to these grooming gangs so we can finish this subject on child rape. This might sound a little bit conspiratorial maybe, but can I take on the Epstein case in America and whether you think his group of people, that the paedophile ring that he was protecting, had anything to do with the so-called Westminster paedophile ring, and whether you think in turn the Westminster paedophile ring has anything at all to do with the grooming gangs in the UK.
Deal with the last bit first, I think. I think that the significant undercurrent of paedophilia amongst the elites, the political elite, probably no doubt the media elite and so on, has an influence on their sympathy for the grooming gangs, which is how you have to see it, and they won't do anything about it. Basically, they don't really regard it as a crime, it's just a natural desire. And the LGBTQ plus, what does that plus hide? That plus hides, that covers, that includes paedophilia. Not all paedophiles are homosexuals. Sorry, not all homosexuals are paedophiles. The vast majority of paedophiles are homosexuals in the white world, not amongst the Muslim thing. That's a different issue. But still, amongst the ruling elite, there are huge numbers of sociopaths and psychopaths who get their kicks, apart from money and power, out of sexual perversion. And paedophilia is just on a scale of sexual perversion. So yeah, I think there's a sort of a connection, whether there's an organizational connection in terms of the grooming gangs providing young girls to politicians and police chiefs and so on. I think there's a hint of that, at least in a low level, in councils in places like Rotherham and so on and so forth. Yeah, I think that is the case, but not perhaps on an organized scale. Coming to Epstein, first thing, what is Epstein? He's supposed to have made his money in on the stock markets and all the futures and all the rest of it. There's no real trace, if you actually really look, there's no trace of that business and so on. Epstein was a front man, just as Robert Maxwell a generation before. Where did his money come from to buy the Daily Mirror to be a key figure? They're just front men for the Mossad, for the most effective secret service in the world, the Israeli Secret Service. How are they effective? Well, one of the ways they're effective is making sure they have the dirt on politicians in important countries around the world. How do we get dirt on politicians? Well, really, it's money, but being in it for the money is wrong, but it's not that shameful. It's not like suicide shameful if it comes out. The shame still amongst most people is with, and it's not even anymore with affairs and all the rest of it. The shame still, there's a lingering shame, as there should be, about paedophilia. So if you can encourage politicians to mess around with pubescent girls and then perhaps drag them even younger or encourage them, give them the opportunity to go even younger, once you've got those photographs, once you've got those video clips, you've got them, which is why the Mossad very clearly funded Epstein to run this operation, to see who they could catch. And the more people you catch, the more power you have over them with the dossier. Now, why they killed Epstein, which they clearly did, I suppose, well, once he's arrested, the beans might come out. So I suppose that's it, basically. His own indiscretion has got too much for him, and so he had to be got rid of. Is there a connection between him and Westminster? Well, there must be, in terms of some of the people who wandered or flew very willingly into his web are no doubt Westminster politicians. We've got the royal connection as well. So yeah, absolutely so. How much of a connection? I could pretend to know, but I'd be lying, wouldn't I? So I simply don't know. But yeah, it's a way of it's a way of directing and controlling the political elite, who are really only ever puppets for just above them, the media elite, puppets for the financial elite, puppets in the end for the banking elite, because they're the ones with the vast amounts of money and the power to tell the others what to do.
When you say elite, Nick, what do you call it? Smoothly takes me into the next topic, and that is the European Parliament, of which you were a member. I saw on social media, I think today or yesterday, a video of Franz Zimmermann, who is the vice president of the European Union, I believe.
Timmerman, he's a Dutch.
Zimmermann, yeah.
Yeah.
And he said, I saw him say this on video, that diversity is humanity's destiny. There is not going to be even the remotest places on this planet a nation that will not see diversity in its future. When he said that, do you think, in your opinion, will that include Israel?
No. Now, Timmerman, someone from Britain especially might think, oh, Timmerman, Zimmerman, he's one of them. He's not. He's from a Roman Catholic family, so he's the upper class, educated, liberal elite who, in that quote, as you say, he's not just describing, he's celebrating the way in which the various races of mankind, the various peoples, the various nations are being eliminated through diversity. And apart from a handful of mainly left-wing Jews, there's no one who dares to point out the intense racism of the Netanyahu government in Israel. But behind that, underneath that, far deeper than that, the intense racism of the Talmud, which is what influences and really sets the direction, the tone of most Jewish society, far more than the Old Testament. The intense racism of the Talmud, and right through to the politics of modern day Israel, they recently expelled very large numbers of black refugees and so on, and people have managed to get into Israel, cheap foreign workers and all the rest of it. So the tendencies of modern technology, which is obviously to make the world smaller, you know, the fact that people can fly into a country very, very easily, it has made a larger degree of mixing between different people much more likely. But Israel is allowed, and the Jews are allowed to say, no, it's not for us. We have to remain pure. It's just for the rest for whom this glorious coffee-coloured, raceless, nationalist vision of the world awaits. And thanks, but leave us out of it. So yeah, it won't include Israel. Now, of course, Timmerman, he's, as you said, the vice president in the European Commission. He was the socialist candidate to actually take over from Juncker. So he's a very, very powerful man. As I say, he's a Roman Catholic, not a Jew. But he, in the European Parliament, he's really there expressing a thought, a train of thought, which has been in the European Parliament, in the European movement from almost before the very beginning. Coudenhove-Kalergi, I'm sure you'll have heard of, as will some of your viewers, but for the benefit of those who don't know about Coudenhove-Kalergi, He was the man who really is the intellectual godfather of the whole European Union project. In its very origins and essence, parts of it not necessarily a bad thing. You have to remember this came about after the First World War, when young idealistic men knew full well, they'd seen many of them, most of them, firsthand, what imperialism and out of control nationalism could do, and the catastrophic war that it led to. And they concluded that if we could get rid of these national governments and so on, and all have one government, then we wouldn't have these wars. Very naive. They tried that in the USA and, of course, had a terrible civil war, but that's rather by the by. You can understand where this came from. And in 1926, Kudnov Kalergi, who was an Austrian-based aristocrat, totally mixed in his own ethnic origins. His mother was Japanese. His father was Austrian, Dutch, Sephardic Jew, all sorts. Kudnov Kalergi personally, Richard Kudnov Kalergi, Count Richard Kudnov Kalergi was his full name. He identified very strongly with the Jewish part of his heritage, which is probably like one finger's worth of Jewish blood, but he identified with it in his head and in his heart very strongly. And he produced this book in 1926, which became really the origins of the European project. And there were two practical idealism. There were two main thrusts in this book towards a European Union. And the first was that to have a European Union, you had to get rid of the old nation states. And this was absolutely the purpose of the European Economic Community, well, European coal and steel to start with, then the common market, then the European Economic Community, then the European Union, in due course, the fully federalized Europe. Right from the very beginning, the idea was clearly understood. If we're going to build this thing and make it last, we have to destroy the nation states. Now, that's openly known. Every politically naive UKIPer knows that that was the case right from the very beginning. What's much less known is that Kudnov Kalergi also said in his book something rather more, and that the people who built the European Union very clearly understood the position here. Kalergi said that it was inevitable, but also it should be encouraged, that the peoples of Europe should, or the Europeans over the whole world, this includes the USA, should be mixed out of existence through mass immigration and then encouraging miscegenation, mass intermarriage and mass interbreeding, should be mixed out of existence so that they become rather like the ancient Egyptians, a completely mixed people. But they would then, in this future world state, not just Europe, they would be ruled over by an elite made up of the Jews ruling out of Israel. Now, he wasn't even to say he was about that Jewish, but he had this mentality. And you could just have written him off as a post-First World War crackpot. But he made many associations with very powerful politicians. He tried everybody. He even tried Mussolini. He tried absolutely everybody to promote these ideas. Max Warburg of the Warburg banking family, who also did a great deal to finance the Bolshevik Revolution and the consequent mass murder in the Soviet Union. But that's rather a different story. Max Warburg funded him, and they built this thing. And so in the end, this did indeed lead to the creation of the European Union. It's often referred to as the Kalergi Prize. Is awarded every 2 years to whichever member of the great and good in Europe has done the most in the eyes of the awarders to advance the cause of European integration. It's not actually the Kalergi Prize, it's the Charlemagne Prize. Kudnov Kalergi was the first winner of it. So he's really central to those people. They don't talk about it much. I made a speech in the European Parliament where you get a ration of 1 minute. 60 seconds is all you're allowed when you're speaking. And I spoke for 60 seconds about the Kudnov Kalergi plan. And there was a horrified silence, apart from one crazed socialist Spanish woman who attacked me over it. But they just don't want to talk about it. But it's there, and it's very much in the undercurrent. These people know perfectly well what they're doing with encouraging mass immigration. They come up with different excuses. Once upon a time, it was because we needed the cheap labor on the buses, and then it was nurses and so on. And then it was going to be a multicultural experiment which would make things better. And now it's refugees, always a different excuse. But the reason for the excuse is that they want to breed us out of existence as separate peoples. Now, is this really all about the Jews? No, because the Habsburg Empire did exactly the same thing in what became Yugoslavia, where they had these people who weren't of their stock, who they were ruling over with an iron fist. And they knew that sooner or later there could be a popular rebellion and that these people would rise up and would throw out their armed forces and so on and take back control of their own destiny. And when you're running an empire, you don't want nations under you. You want mixed up populations under you. The British did this in India. They deliberately, British intelligence, helped to export Salafist Islam to India. They did it to Cyprus as well, so that the natives, instead of hating the Brits, would hate each other on religious grounds. So it's an old trick, divide and rule. And the liberal capitalist, don't forget that, pure capitalist elite who design and are building this European federal superstate want to get a right to do away with a homogeneous Britain, with a homogeneous Sweden, with a homogeneous Italy, etc., because once everybody's mixed up, you cannot have a national rebellion against their tyranny. So yes, the Talmudic influence, which you see coming through amongst Jewish politicians, Jewish media elite, who've really provided the shock troops for this push. Yes, there is that element, but also you simply got the old imperialist capitalist elites wanting to mix the peasants up. So anytime the peasants get revolting, they can set the peasants against each other.
I think that the media, the mainstream media, have a very much to answer for, Nick, because if you search for the Kalergi plan or Richard Cowdenhoe Kalergi on a search engine, you will find that Wikipedia, for example, tells you that it's a right-wing conspiracy theory. Now, I know that to be false. You know that to be false. You stood up in the European Parliament and spoke about it. And now we have people like this Austrian member of European Parliament, what's his name, Othmar Karas.
Yeah.
I saw of him, who was delighting in the fact that the Kalergi plan is being realized in the European Union. And this was broadcast on German national television, but yet people still will shake their heads or maybe laugh at you, call you a fool because you believe in these so-called conspiracy theories. I also know that you are probably the most, what can I say, lied about British politician in modern history. I saw I don't know whether it was a question time. No, it wasn't question time. It was an interview. I think it might have been on Sky News with you. And they completely, whatever you said, they completely ignored it. They didn't respond to what you were saying, but they point just to bang you down to the floor, and if I had been in that position, I would not have been able to hold my tongue in that position. I would have really shouted, why aren't you listening to what I'm saying? But that's why I'm not a successful politician, because I just do have the tolerance for such people. But Nick, can you tell us about the achievements, some of the achievements? For example, we talked before we went live about Nigel Farage and the way the BBC has been, everything has been stacked against you whilst Nigel Farage forward. Can you speak to us about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Yes. This now it's something now in the past. I haven't been involved in the British National Party or politics in Britain since 2014. But when the BBC was promoting Nigel Farage, this was basically from about 2008 from 2001, when the British National Party really burst on the scene, I took 16% of the vote in the parliamentary general election in Oldham West, and it caused an absolute sensation. And then literally every election after that, whether national, local, European, every election until 2012, we were the British National Party, and the BNP threat was the main sub-threat running, sub-subject, other than who was going to win, running through the entire liberal media, the BBC, the Guardian, etc., etc. For more than 10 years, we literally gave them sleepless nights. And up until 2008, the whole left-wing and liberal and corporate and conservative elite, because they're all in it together, tried to oppose us by saying we were unacceptable, we were extreme, we were neo-Nazis, whatever, just with these smears. And the more they did it, the more actually people voted for us. Because what it was telling people was that finally there was a group who weren't part of the cosy political club that all the other politicians hated. And that if you really wanted to get up the other politicians' noses, you could vote for them. And I actually had this, we brought back canvassing in Britain. The other parties have got lazy and fat and they've given it up. And we started knocking and talking to people and winning council elections because people said, I haven't seen a politician here for 15 years. You're here on my doorstep on a cold February evening. I'm going to vote for you just because you're here. And so the other parties in the end responded to them. They started canvassing as well. But we were terrifying them for these years. And the more they attacked us as extreme and unacceptable, the more people voted for us. I remember one chap in Halifax who knocked on his door. He said, I'm voting for you. I said, thank you very much. He said, yeah, I think you're a C. And your party's C, but I'm voting for you. I said, well, why? So he said, well, it's like this. He said that you're so bad that if we vote for you, they'll realise something's wrong. And he told me sort of an anecdote, an idea that a woman whose husband was ignoring her decides to go and have an affair, and she has an opportunity to go with the wealthiest, most handsome man in town or the village idiot. And she ends up screwing the village idiot. So, well, why? Well, because if she'd gone with the best, most handsome, richest looking man in town, her husband wouldn't have been bothered. Not at least he'd have understood it. But going with the village idiot really got up his nose. So he said, so that's why I'm voting for you. And there was a great deal of truth in that, I'm afraid. So 2008, the BBC, the real core of the whole political elite project, came up with a different solution, which was because slagging us off as Nazis and extremists, homophobes, especially now Islamophobes, that was a disastrous own goal. None of this had worked. Trying to put me in prison had gone horribly wrong. So they started instead to promote Nigel Farage. And they had him on Question Time week after week, basically. And they had him on chat shows. They had him on Have I Got News for You? They had him on all these things. Now, Farage is supposedly everything the BBC hates, but they constantly promoted him. And they promoted him on the grounds that they'd let him talk about Europe, they'd let him talk about East European immigration, but never to talk about anything about hidden power elites, and never to talk about any form of coloured immigration into Britain, never even to talk about Islam, just talk about the Poles, basically. And then they convinced the British people that when he was talking about the Poles, he was actually talking about the immigrants who were really their problem, because unless you're a plumber, you haven't got a problem with Polish immigrants. You've got a problem if you're in the Midlands, the north of England or whatever, you've got a problem with those people nonceing your daughter, and with the way in which the police, the local politicians and so on, side with them at every possible turn, whatever happens, anytime there's the slightest friction between the two communities. But that's why people voted for Farage, because the BBC promoted him massively as the voice against immigration and the voice against the establishment. When I was elected in 2009 with 2 MEPs, no, sorry, let's go back, Question Time. Before the BNP began to rise to public prominence, all sorts of people got on Question Time, including the leaders of tiny political parties with no elected representation, such as the Greens in the early days, such as various splinter groups in the Labour Party. And when we started to get noticed, we said, well, you're going to have Nick Griffin on Question Time. They said, no, because you've got no elected representatives. Oh, Okay. So we went away and we came back and said, we've got some councillors elected now. So we've got elected representatives. So when's Nick Griffin on Question Time? Oh, sorry, no, it's not a matter of councillors. You've got to have more than 50. Okay. So we went away. We got more than 50 elected. We came back about this question of appearance. Oh, no, we changed the rules now. You've got to have MPs or at least 2 members of the European Parliament. And then you go on Question Time. So 2009, we got 2 MPs elected to the European Parliament and went back to the BBC and said, right, now come on, Question Time. So they put me on Question Time once. Nigel Farage was the leader of a party which had crossed exactly the same threshold as us. 2 or more members of the European Parliament. That was all. No one in the Westminster Parliament at the time. There was just 2 or more, not 2 and you get 1 appearance and 4 and you get 2, etc., etc. We were on the same threshold. In the time I was on Question Time once, more about that in a moment, Nigel Farage was on Question Time 22 times, put there by the BBC. The one time I was on was, as I'm sure if you saw it, you'll remember, it was not Question Time at all. It was a coordinated lynch mob where I went on, and you said a little while ago that if you were put through this sort of thing, you'd end up shouting at people. I did that once with Tim Sebastian, who interviewed me for Hard Talk. And we had just a ding-dong. He wouldn't let me finish, so I wouldn't stop. It was just a shouting match. It made horrible television, and we got very bad feedback, basically. So I went on Question Time with the intention of getting beaten up in public, which I duly was. And the only time they let me speak, actually, was to allow me to let me say enough to establish the first half of the programme was trying to show I was a fascist, which I never have been. And the second half was they allowed me to speak enough to show I was an Islamophobe, enough to show that I was a racist, and enough to show that I was a homophobe. Their labels, not mine. Now, the impact of that actually was very interesting. Although there's a myth that it was a disaster for me and the public were appalled and they never had to have me on again, the reality is that the week before Question Time, the British National Party's highest ever standing in the opinion polls was 6%. The week after Question Time, it was 23%. 23% of the British population said having seen that, and 9 million people watched it there and then, 23% said they'd now consider voting British National Party. The BBC looked at that, obviously, thought, oh my God, we gave it our best shot with a brutal ambush and public lynching, and it led to a quadrupling of the BNP's potential support. From that day on, the BBC never had me on anything unless they were legally bound to, as in the general election of, was it 2013, where we beat UKIP, as a matter of fact. The British National Party beat UKIP even after that. But and since then, because they now aren't bound to have me on, because I'm not representing a political party which is standing, say, in the election, the BBC, none of the press have had me on at all. This was a blanket ban. That now extends as far as even social media. So that I was sent the other day a message that someone had got from Facebook explaining why he got a 30-day ban. And all he'd done was he published, put on his own timeline, a picture of him and me some years before, and said, whatever you think of Nick Griffin's politics, he's a decent bloke. 30-day ban for breaching community standards. So that's where I've gone. I'm still here. I've still got things to say about where this country's going. As you said, I've actually got more experience and a better track record of speaking about these things than many, many others. But people are forbidden to hear what I've got to say, except going to kind people like you on YouTube, and we'll see how long this stays up on YouTube.
Not very long, I don't think. But can you imagine, Nick, what would happen if people like yourself were given an honest, open platform like Farage got? Can you imagine what would happen in the United Kingdom? It would be an absolute turnaround. I really do believe it. If national parties were given the same, if the goalposts were the same and they were given the same opportunities, I think that we would see an enormous backlash against.
Yep, we would, but it won't. So don't anyone sit around waiting for the great white hope, the knight on the shining white steed coming to save you. Ain't going to happen. You save your family, you build your communities, you save yourselves one way or the other, because no one else is going to do it for you.
You say, I'll go back to just that trailer I made about this interview, where I received some comments from some of my subscribers asking whether there would be an opportunity, whether you thought or were thinking maybe of resurrecting the BNP and driving it forward again.
Well, the BNP still exists. I was actually expelled from it, just very, very briefly, because again, you said, I know people do sort of wonder where did Nick Griffin go. So just as the final part of the BNP story, in the last year, basically while I was still an MEP, the treasurer came to me and he said, I've got an idea, Nick. He said, we've had one or two bequests. The party had occasionally had bequests from elderly people left, remembered us in their will. And he said, I don't we need to push these bequests more. We need to really encourage people to leave us things in their wills. So I said, yeah, that's logical enough. You know, the Cath Protection League does it. The National Trust does it. We should do it. So we had this campaign, and a few months before the 2013 election, he came back to me and he said, Nick, this has gone really well. And he said, I've got this in this file here. This is not the wills. There's wills out there we don't know about, left to us for sure, because the ones we had in the past we didn't know about. But the ones we know about, the ones I've actually got a copy of here in this folder, this is worth over £10 million.
Oh.
So well done, brilliant, fantastic. You're not going to get it tomorrow, but it will come in. Good. I said, there is a problem, Clive, because he was the treasurer. He was also dealing with wills. He went on a will writing course so he could write the wills for people. So he was writing the wills, he was handling them, and the woman who was phoning the people who left wills once a month, just to keep in touch with them, basically, a little bit of customer care, as it were. And therefore, the one who knew if one of these people was sick or going to die or had died, she was his backdoor girlfriend. It was widely known, open secret. So I said, what you've done is really good, Clive, but this setup where you're the only one who knows what's coming in, other than your girlfriend, and then the wills, you're in charge of making the wills and you then receive them, that looks bad. So I know you're not going to steal them. It looks as though you could. It puts you and the party at risk of being seriously bad-mouthed and being in the wrong. So we need to regularize all this and put in checks and balances, make it proper. He said, yeah, I agree with you. So I said, it needs to be sorted out. He said, I agree with you. We'll sort it out after the election. So I said, deal. That's all right. Had a couple of months. First meeting of the party's governing body after the election, he'd lied and bribed to enough members of the body that they got rid of him. And then shortly thereafter, once they were able to, because I was then saying, this is an asset stripping theft, something needs to be done about it, then they expelled me. So the BNP is still there. It shrunk to a tiny fraction of its former self. There's now a vicious battle going on between some of the people who voted to get rid of me, who've now realized that they've got a bunch of asset stripping crooks running the show, and they've walked off with lots of money. Many people have cancelled their wills, but it's made them lots of money. There's now a vicious battle for control of the party, and we'll see what happens. Would I resurrect it or do something else? As I said before, I will not put myself up to say, give me money, give me support, come along, because we're going to put it all right, because it can't be put right. I'm writing a book at the moment, which in fact it's a book in two halves, about where we are now and where we're going to go from here. When I finish that book, that will include a list of serious proposals as to where we can go, what the indigenous peoples of Britain and people such as many say in the Sikh community who wish us well, what we can do between us to establish a new kind of politics for the new era that we're going to be in, given that we are going to become a minority in our own homeland. That is unavoidable. It's the same is true for all the peoples of the whole of Western Europe, some quicker than others, the Swedes very quickly, the French quite quickly, the Americans as well. We're going to become minorities in our own homeland. Now, all the old racist little grouplets and so on, they sort of have this, this is a brick wall. You hit that and it's all over. It's not all over. When we're a minority in our own homeland, we will still be the largest minority for a very, very long time. We'll be a minority with rights. Will are the special rights of the indigenous people, which, for instance, the American Indians have special rights. A tiny drop of American Indian blood in the United States gives you all sorts of legal privileges. There's nothing unusual in the idea that indigenous peoples have special rights. At the very least, indigenous people have the right to be recognized and the right to organize their community lives so that they, in their own sphere, carry on, even while the rest of the society in the country that their ancestors gave away does other things. And that civil rights struggle of the indigenous British is something which I am going to be involved in. I'm going to lead because no one else will damn well do it. And it's not anything for people who hate my old politics to be afraid of, because it's not some kind of cover to turn the clock back. It's not something that's going to cause trouble. The thing that will cause real big trouble is if, as the peoples of Europe become minorities in their own homeland, if as well as that, they're not allowed to speak. They alone aren't allowed to celebrate their heritage. They alone aren't allowed to organize politically in a country now divided on ethno-religious lines, as it used to be divided on class lines. If we alone are not allowed to organize to look after our own interests, then the frustration and the anger that causes will lead quite simply to terrorist violence. There's no other way. That's what will happen. I'm not saying it's a good thing, I'm just saying that is what will happen. So the Liberals need to understand that in the world we're moving to, they need people like me and the party that I'm going to build, and people in other countries who understand the same message. They need us so that our people don't feel, as they see they're becoming this minority, they don't feel, I've got no choice, I'm going to become an oppressed minority, this is also wrong, I'm going to start killing people. They instead have a legitimate, sensible, constructive outlet which can, by hook or by crook, at least try to make a silk purse out of the sow's ear that we've now been given.
To kind of finish this interview off, Nick, are you able to talk about the group that you're involved in called the Knights Templar International?
Yes, a little bit. I do some work with the KTI and I'm a member and so on. It's not a secret group, but it's a group with secrets, or a group which are better kept, things which are better left unsaid because our opponents would want to destroy us. So it's a very firmly Christian group. It's taken the name and the mythology of the old Templars, as have many other groups. There's something like 1,700 different groups at the last count around the world, mainly on the internet, claiming to be Knights Templar and generally saying, give us money. We say, yeah, join us and give us money, because there's things such as injustices against Christian families who are objecting to their children at the age of 4 or 5 being taught that they can choose one of 72 genders, and that if they want to be chemically and physically mutilated in a few years' time, then that's fine by them. I get angry, by the way, about and the Templars have mentioned this a number of times. It's the sort of thing we do. We say, talking to people in the counter jihad, yes, we understand, and you're quite right to be angry about genital mutilation in large parts of the Islamic community for girls, for boys as well, for that matter. But you have no right at all to condemn that as if it's some special evil, when the LGBT community are trying to force on our kids the same idea. And there's a National Health Service taxpayer-funded clinic, the Portman Clinic, making huge sums of money from castrating little boys to turn them into fake little girls, genital mutilation on behalf of an ideology, LGBTQ+. There's no difference between that and what the Islamists do. So our position is that as believing Christians and as non-racist nationalists, that we need to help organize people and so on to stand up in defense of our rights. In particular, what we do, and it's caused all sorts of trouble and so on, and all sorts of hysterical allegations, we perceive that there's a war coming in the West between radical Islam and the rest of us. Not just the ordinary Muslims, the Zionist elite are pushing just as hard for this war as the radical Islamists are. And most ordinary Muslims don't want it. That's rather by the by. There is a war coming. There's no way around it. In wars, men of violence rise to the top. Basically, the former Yugoslavia, when it fell apart, the people who that was really based on were the football gangs from the different big sides on the different sides of the community fence, Bosnian, Serbian, Croatian, and so on. And they became militias, and then the militias basically became armies. And when you get this kind of war developing, just as in Northern Ireland, so not even a full-scale war, in a relatively low-level community disturbance between two communities, Catholic and Protestant, you ended up with men of violence, men with a gun on both sides. That's going to happen. Now, the only question is there a set of ideas in the head and in the hearts of those men who rise to the top? And looking at the right, the far right, the extreme right, there's two sets of ideas possible, which are going to be in the heads of the men at the top. There's the Nazi, Nietzschean, might is right, white jihad, pure poison, which sees women as sex objects to be raped, who sees the other people as just subhumans to be exterminated. There's that side of things. Or there's the Christian side, the similar side, the old Knights Templar, fought bravely, heroically, with incredible efficiency against the Muslims in the Holy Land and in Spain for the liberation of Christian lands that had been stolen. And we believe that our message that, yes, there's going to be a war, but the people running the war have to do so with chivalry. The people running the war to defend our people have to be doing it to defend our people, not so that they can be the ones who loot from them, who tax from them, who steal from them, and who rape their daughters, which is exactly, and that's going to be the choice. And as these right-wing militias get more and more power in more and more countries, which they will, again, I ask the Liberals, who do you want to see in charge? Do you want to see Nietzschean, woman-hating fanatics who just believe that the gun is the only law? Do you want to see them running your society? Or do you want to see men who may be very rough around the edges, with bald heads and tattoos and all the rest, things you don't like, but men who perceive themselves as having a Christian duty, not only to save their countries, but also to defend the weak and to build a better society? And that's something, the key thing the Templars are about, is taking that message to the radicalized young men, not to cause trouble, but so that when there is trouble, it's not as bad as it otherwise will be.
I can see out of the corner of my eye the chat in because there are 380 people watching, Nick, at the moment, and they are writing comments, and I'm trying not to read them because it distracts me from what you're saying, but I am reading that people want to know a little bit more about this Knights Templar International. So can I ask you, you said that it's a Christian organization. Do you have to be a Christian to join? And let's say, for example, my husband wanted to join, for example, is there some kind of initiation ceremony or something like that? And I ask all of this because of one thing, and I'm not out to make fun of anybody at all, but it's the questions that go through my head, so maybe it goes through other people's heads too. When I looked at the Knights Templar International website, the one that you are connected to, I saw
allegedly
people wearing allegedly I saw people wearing kind of like capes, and there's a ceremony with crosses and so on and so forth. Now, I don't want to put anybody down, but when I see something like that, I think of that film Eyes Wide Shut by Stanley Kubrick, and I wonder, in modernity, is that sort of thing necessary with these ceremonies and with the capes and all of that? Is it necessary?
Well, you say in today's modernity, perhaps not in today's modernity, but we're in the end days of today's modernity. We're going into a much darker and less comfortable world for all sorts of reasons. So I think at that stage, people will realize that they need something rather deeper. So those ceremonies aren't for everybody. There's a LARPing element about it, but it's also very serious. They are very solemn. They're very genuine vows. They're made with a genuine priest and with genuine intent. And it does build, especially amongst men, have an innate biologically built desire to belong to some, to a club, to a society, and something which actually it's away from other people. It sort of shuts other people out, or it's just us. Men have a desire for that, and so it's a way of expressing that. If people don't like it, they don't have to be involved. So you can join and never go through that ceremony. You can be involved and never go through that. You don't have to have a cloak and a cape and a sword and all the rest of it. But so really that's up to you entirely. It's ktorder.com if people want to have a look and look at the kind of work we do. We would be very much more efficient if we were left alone. I'm sure a lot of your audience will be British. I don't know how many Americans you have, but up to 2 years ago, we built an enormous Facebook reach, because the idea of people in cloaks and so on, perhaps it's a bit of a joke. I understand people thinking that. So it's not a joke. Brexit's not a joke. Trump wasn't a joke, and we played major roles in both of those happening, because we built a Facebook reach, which we had with various different interlocking pages, not Templar pages, news pages, Christian news pages, just right-wing news pages and so on, news aggregation pages. We built a total likes of about 5 million. And in the Brexit campaign, we were delivering 70 million unique posts to British voters every week. And the same in the Trump campaign, 70 million. Now, there's been all the fuss about the Russians working to influence the Trump election. And it came out in the end that there were, I think it was $3,000 of advertising to promote Facebook posts, which were sort of associated with sites associated with Russia. Mainly because when you start getting banned in Britain, having a site in Russia is a good way forward. $3,000, we were spending that a day promoting Facebook posts. We were spending that every single day. We were raising it mainly through this enormous reach at a time when you made money from adverts on your pages. We were raising that money and we were spending that money promoting that message. And other people did it as well, but we had very well-designed memes. Colleague involved is a marketing genius. We have well-designed marketing memes which really reached into blue-collar Britain with Brexit messages and blue-collar America with pro-Trump messages. And if people are told by a politician on a television they should vote some way, most people don't take any notice of it. How people change their votes or decide to go and vote, having previously for years thought it's hopeless. People change their decision to vote or how to vote really on the basis of what their friends or people in their circles who they admire a bit, what they think. And Facebook and the way we exploited it, use the word quite honestly, the way we exploited it was an extraordinarily powerful way of reaching people and getting ordinary people to contact other ordinary people. Have you seen this? I agree entirely. And we were very heavily involved in that. Now, we're not now, because we've gone from millions of reaches on Facebook to zero, because we've been completely banned. And obviously, no, it's not just us. Everybody now. It started off with a handful of Nazi cranks, and then it became right-wing people generally. Then it became Christians. It's now even becoming feminists who don't appreciate men pretending to be women, when in fact a man who's had his genitalia cut off is not a woman, he's a eunuch. But a eunuch in a dress can now turn up and put on a sports costume, and women have to compete with a man. It's crazed. And even feminists who are now saying this is crazy, they're getting now banned from Facebook and YouTube and so on for hate speech. But we were among the early victims, and it frankly wiped out an enormous part of our revenue stream, and it particularly wiped out our capability to do good. But we're doing other things. That's just a kind of, it just gives a little taste for people that the Knights Templar International isn't just about putting on cloaks.
So it's kti.org.
KTI. So I think the best one is ktorder.com. ktorder.com.
ktorder.com.
By all means, come and have a look.
So,
You also people have to be a Christian. Yep, they do. You
yeah.
have to accept the Nicene Creed. You don't have to be a good Christian. You don't have to be a practicing Christian. You have to accept the Nicene Creed. So it's not just Protestants or Catholics. It's Russian Orthodox as well, who, in my opinion, are the only genuine organization, the only genuine Christians out there nowadays, and a beautiful church, very, very close in its way of doing things, its way of thinking, to the Celtic and Anglo-Saxon churches before the Norman conquest, as a matter of fact. So it belongs in this country, but that's my personal view. So yeah, you don't have to be a practicing Christian, but you have to accept the Nicene Creed. If you don't, you may be a very good person, but go off and do something yourself. But yeah, do something, but don't come and join us.
Well, Nick, many people have missed seeing you and hearing you. And so I was so happy that I could host you and give you a platform to speak today. It was such an honor for me to speak to you. And so I want to thank you really from the bottom of my heart for agreeing to come onto my very, very small channel. You didn't have to, but I really, really do appreciate it. And I know the people in the chat, when you look back, gets put up to YouTube, have a read of what people are saying in the chat. You are a hero in some of these people's eyes, and I think you always will be. You stood up when no one else really did, and I think we all appreciate you for that, Nick. And apart from KT, what's it called, Knights Templar International, is there anywhere else that people can find you? Are you on Twitter?
Yes,
for example?
Indeed. I don't know why I'm still on Twitter, but I am still on Twitter. So do please come and follow me on Twitter. I tweet most days, something which is going to offend someone or other. And when I have things which are simply too impolite to say on Twitter, I also use Gab. So come along and please follow me on Twitter and Gab. Twitter, I guess, I'm going to get knocked off at some stage. Gab, I guess, will end up probably as the last outpost of scoundrels and monsters such as myself for the time being. I wouldn't, by the way, people shouldn't be too worried about the clampdown on social media. This takes us back. I've been involved in radical ideas in politics since 1974, when I was 15. And in those days, we didn't have anything like Facebook. We didn't have any of these. We got by through word of mouth, through leaflets, through cheaply produced magazines and things like that. It's very sad that we're going back to those times. I think that the liberals who are doing this clampdown are making a terrible mistake, because they're forcing lots of people, especially, into little cliques. They're forcing angry young men, especially, onto the dark web. It's a very dangerous and ugly place. And they're forcing them. When you force people off Facebook, you don't stop them talking to people who think like them. You mean they only talk to people who think exactly like them. Because they force people into these little groups. And forcing angry young men into little groups where they have no contact with the rest of the world is a cast iron guaranteed way to create terrorists. It's really stupid. They should take it all off. The internet should be free. President Trump should free it, because he's the one man in the world with the power to do it. And even though his own base is being wiped out on social media, deplatformed, denied the right to run businesses, really denied the right to exist and function in modern society, he's done nothing about it. Very, very foolish. He should be. He probably won't. But don't worry too much about it. I'll still be here. People with different ideas will still be here. And the times that are coming are going to prove very much not only that we were right, but that our message is still needed.
Hallelujah to that. Thanks ever so much, Nick. I'm going to end the stream now. We've been going for an hour and 20 minutes. And on a Thursday afternoon, 400 people, that's not bad when people probably are watching us on the sly at work and all that sort of thing. So, Nick, once again, thanks so much. Stay on the line whilst I end this broadcast, and I'll speak to you after I switch off the live stream. To everybody else who've been watching today, you're very welcome. And to everybody else, thanks so much for joining me and Nick on this live stream. I know it wasn't supposed to be live, but we had a bit of a technical problem, so this was the only solution we could come up with. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've enjoyed listening to Nick Griffin again, and we're glad that he is still around and he's okay and he is still fighting for white well-being. So with that, I'll say adios and I'll see you soon. Bye. And I can't end the broadcast. And I still can't end the broadcast. There it is.